She fined me $1,000 for swimming in my own damn lake. The violation notice arrived Tuesday morning like a legal slap in the face. 20 years of peaceful morning swims in spring water my grandfather bought in the 1960s, and suddenly I'm a criminal facing daily penalties, liens, and court threats for using my own property. This power-hungry HOA president had been conducting evening spy missions, photographing my routine like I was breaking federal law instead of enjoying family land that predates her precious development by decades. Here's what made my blood boil. She didn't just fine me. She claimed my family's lake now fell under HOA jurisdiction. That arrogant sentence turned a $1,000 shakedown into total war over American property rights. But when I hit the courthouse basement digging through dusty land records, her fake authority started crumbling faster than a house of cards. Keep watching, because what I discovered next will blow your mind. Let me paint you the full picture here. My name's Marcus Wellington, 52 years old, and I've spent my adult life as an electrical contractor, the kind of guy who can wire your house so it doesn't burn down and actually shows up when he says he will. Novel concept, I know. This lake property came to me the hard way, through my grandfather's will after he passed in 2005. 15 acres of Colorado paradise, complete with a hand-built cabin, solar panels I installed myself, and a small dock made from timber we cut right here on the land. The lake itself? Pure spring-fed mountain water, crystal clear, about 2 acres of liquid heaven that's been here longer than most folks have been alive. My grandfather, rest his stubborn soul, bought this land back in 1960 when Pine Ridge was nothing but pine trees and ridge lines. No HOA, no McMansions, just a man with a vision and enough grit to make it happen. The morning air still carries that crisp pine scent that makes you understand why people fight wars over territory, mixed with the earthy sweetness of lake water that's never known a chemical treatment. Fast forward to today, and my little slice of paradise is surrounded by 47 houses worth more than most people's retirement accounts. We're talking 800K McMansions with perfect lawns, 3-car garages, and the kind of people who measure their grass height with actual rulers. Most of these neighbors are decent folks, retirees who wave from their morning walks, young families whose kids I've helped with science fair projects involving solar panels. But every neighborhood has that one person who treats community involvement like a full-contact sport. Enter Brenda Kensington, 45 years old, real estate agent turned HOA president, and the human equivalent of a splinter you can't quite dig out. She moved here 3 years ago in a white Range Rover with a blessed license plate frame, irony so thick you could cut it with a butter knife. Within 6 months, she'd run for the HOA board. Within a year, she'd bullied the previous president into stepping down through a campaign of complaints that would make a telemarketer quit in shame. Brenda's the kind of woman who conducts evening patrols of the neighborhood, her heels clicking against the asphalt like a metronome counting down to somebody's misery. You can smell her coming from 3 houses away, some chemical perfume that probably costs more per ounce than my monthly electric bill and hits your sinuses like industrial solvent. The neighborhood dynamic was actually pretty peaceful before Hurricane Brenda made landfall. The previous HOA president, a retired teacher named Bill, believed in the radical concept of minding your own business unless someone was actually causing problems. Bill understood that an HOA should maintain property values, not conduct psychological warfare against residents. But Brenda? She's turned community management into an art form of petty tyranny. She times people's garage doors to catch violations. She measures grass with rulers. She's been known to photograph barbecue smoke, claiming it's a nuisance emission. 3 weeks ago, during one of her evening reconnaissance missions, she spotted me taking my usual swim. Now, I've been swimming in this lake every morning for 20 years. Part of my routine, like coffee or checking the weather. It's how I start my day, how I clear my head, how I remember that life is more than electrical panels and invoice disputes. But apparently, my morning constitutional was creating what Brenda called an unsightly recreational disturbance affecting property values. She spent the next week researching property records, hunting through HOA covenants like a lawyer preparing for trial, looking for any angle to flex her authority. And she found one. Or thought she did. According to Brenda's interpretation of the HOA covenants, my lake creates a visibility issue that violates community aesthetic standards. Never mind that the lake was here 30 years before the first HOA meeting. Never mind that half these people bought their houses specifically because they could see water from their back decks. That woman turned my morning peace into a legal battlefield, and honestly, that was her first mistake. The violation notice arrived on a Tuesday morning, delivered with all the ceremony of a court summons. Brenda had clearly spent time crafting this masterpiece of bureaucratic intimidation. Notice of violation: unpermitted recreational water activity visible from community areas. $1,000. Plus $50 daily penalties until compliance achieved. And just to twist the knife, she demanded I cease all lake use and install privacy screening around my own property. I read that notice 3 times, each reading making the coffee in my stomach curdle a little more. The audacity was breathtaking, like someone telling you to stop breathing because they don't like the sound. But here's what Brenda didn't count on. I'm the kind of guy who actually reads his paperwork. That afternoon, I climbed into my truck and drove to the county courthouse, that musty-smelling monument to civic duty where dreams go to get stamped in triplicate. 3 hours in the basement records room, surrounded by the peculiar mixture of old paper and industrial cleaning products, and I found exactly what I was looking for. My grandfather's original deed. 40 pages of legal language that boiled down to one beautiful fact. My property was specifically excluded from any future HOA jurisdiction. The old man had been smarter than I'd given him credit for. He'd seen the writing on the wall when developers started sniffing around Pine Ridge in the 1990s. But I wanted to be thorough. I hired a surveyor, cost me $2,200, but money well spent, to map every boundary line with GPS precision. The results were gorgeous. 15 acres of sovereign territory with water rights that predated the HOA by 3 decades. Armed with documentation, I did what any reasonable person would do. I showed up to the next HOA board meeting. Picture this: Tuesday night, community center that smells like burnt coffee and broken dreams, fluorescent lights humming like angry bees, 23 residents scattered across folding chairs that squeak every time someone shifts their weight. Brenda presiding from behind a card table like she's running the United Nations. I waited my turn, polite as Sunday church, then stood up with my surveyor's report and grandfather's deed. I believe there's been a misunderstanding about my property boundaries, I said, keeping my voice level. According to these documents, my land predates HOA authority by 30 years. The room got quiet enough to hear the coffee maker gurgling in the corner. Brenda's response was predictable. She barely glanced at my evidence before launching into a speech about grandfathered properties still being subject to community standards and maintaining neighborhood aesthetic values. She claimed that regardless of boundaries, my activities were affecting everyone's property values. "Are you saying you won't retract this violation?" I asked. "I'm saying," Brenda replied, her manicured nails tapping against the table like machine gun fire, "that community standards apply to everyone, and if you don't pay this fine within 30 days, we'll explore legal options." That's when things got interesting. Mrs. Emerson, the retired teacher who lives 2 houses down, quietly raised her hand. "Brenda," she said in that voice teachers use when they've caught you cheating, "how exactly does someone swimming in their own lake affect my property value?" Brenda's face flushed red enough to stop traffic. "Mrs. Emerson, this is about precedent. If we allow one resident to ignore community standards—" "What standards?" interrupted Bob Fitzgerald, a retired engineer built like a linebacker who drives a truck older than some of my tools. "The man owns the lake. You can't fine someone for using their own property." I watched Brenda's control slip another notch. She started photographing my property from the public road the next day, like some suburban private investigator. But here's the beautiful part. All that research she'd done to attack me, it led me to research her. Turns out our fearless HOA president had been quite busy. In the past year, she'd issued $47,000 in fines across the neighborhood. $47,000. And according to the HOA financial reports, $15,000 of that had gone to administrative consulting fees paid to Brenda's own real estate LLC. You want to talk about community standards? How about using your HOA position to fund your own business? That's when I realized this wasn't about my lake at all. This was about a woman drunk on small-time power, using her position to intimidate neighbors into paying money that ended up in her own pocket. The mini twist hit me like lightning. Brenda wasn't just power-hungry. She was running a scam, using manufactured violations to generate revenue, and I had the paper trail to prove it. Game on, Brenda. You just picked a fight with someone who actually knows how to wire a circuit and how to follow the money. Brenda's next move came faster than a Colorado thunderstorm. If she couldn't intimidate me with HOA violations, she'd escalate to county authorities. 3 days after the board meeting, a code enforcement officer showed up at my door with a clipboard and the weary expression of someone who'd been dragged into neighborhood drama against his better judgment. Got a complaint about unpermitted dock structures, Officer Martinez explained, apologizing with his tone before he even started his inspection. Someone claims you've built unauthorized improvements affecting waterway access. I walked him down to my dock, the same dock my grandfather and I had built 20 years ago, complete with all the proper permits. Martinez took one look at the documentation, then at my modest wooden structure, then back at his complaint form. "Sir," he said, scratching his head, "whoever filed this report either hasn't seen your dock or doesn't understand what unpermitted structure means. This is about as legal as they come." As Martinez drove away, I noticed Brenda's Range Rover parked 2 blocks down, positioned for perfect surveillance. The woman was conducting counterintelligence operations against a guy who just wanted to swim in his own lake. The absurdity would have been hilarious if it wasn't costing me time and money. But 2 can play the investigation game. That evening, I started digging deeper into Brenda's HOA financial management. What I found made my electrical contractor's instincts tingle like a live wire. In 18 months as HOA president, Brenda had authorized over $30,000 in consulting services to her real estate company. Landscaping decisions that coincidentally required contractors who gave her referral kickbacks. Security camera installations by companies that employed her husband. Even the HOA's insurance carrier switch, surprise, surprise, netted her a finder's fee. The smell of corruption was stronger than diesel fumes from Bob Fitzgerald's old pickup. But Brenda wasn't finished escalating. Next came the whisper campaign. Suddenly, neighbors who'd never complained about my lake before were asking questions about property value impacts and insurance liability issues. Phone calls to my electrical business questioning my professionalism and community standing. That's when I realized Brenda was targeting my livelihood. Attacking my property was one thing, but going after my business? That crossed a line brighter than arc welding. I made some calls of my own. Turns out 3 other property owners had dealt with Brenda's creative enforcement. Mrs. Patterson, the widow next street over, got fined for excessive holiday decorations. Apparently, her Christmas lights were community disruptions. The fine just happened to come 2 weeks after Brenda's real estate company listed a similar house in the neighborhood. Then there was the Johnsons, who got hit with vehicle storage violations for parking their RV in their own driveway. The harassment continued until they hired Brenda's recommended contractor to build a storage shed at twice the market rate, naturally. Bob Fitzgerald had his own story. After his wife passed, Brenda started pressuring him about property maintenance standards, suggesting he might be happier in a retirement community. She even brought potential buyers to look at his house before it was listed, claiming she was being proactive about neighborhood transitions. The pattern was clearer than mountain spring water. Brenda used HOA enforcement to pressure property sales, generating business for herself while traumatizing her neighbors. I decided it was time to file my own complaints. The state real estate board takes a dim view of agents who use official positions for personal profit. I documented every suspicious transaction, every convenient contractor recommendation, every fine that coincided with Brenda's business activities. But the best part? I discovered something that would change everything. While researching water rights for my legal defense, I found documentation that my grandfather hadn't just bought land. He'd purchased exclusive rights to the natural spring system that feeds my lake. Rights that included control over water access for the entire Pine Ridge development. Every ornamental pond in the neighborhood, every irrigation system, every decorative water feature that made these houses worth $800K, they all depended on water that flowed from springs I legally owned. The mini twist hit like a revelation. I wasn't just defending my right to swim in my own lake. I was sitting on water rights that could shut down the entire development's water supply. Brenda had picked a fight with the wrong guy, and she had no idea how badly she'd miscalculated. Martinez, the code enforcement officer, called that evening with an update. "Mr. Wellington, just wanted you to know, we're seeing a pattern of frivolous complaints from your HOA. This is the 4th bogus report this month. You might want to document everything because this looks like harassment." I thanked Martinez and hung up the phone, grinning like a man who'd just discovered he'd been holding royal flush cards all along. Time to raise the stakes, Brenda. Brenda's response to my state real estate board complaint was swift and vicious. If she couldn't destroy my property rights or intimidate me with fake code violations, she'd try character assassination. The anonymous Facebook account appeared first. Pine Ridge Neighbor Watch, posting photos of my property with captions like "Environmental hazard threatens community water supply" and "Unpermitted activities create liability issues." The photos were taken with a telephoto lens from the public road, technically legal but creepy enough to make a private investigator blush. Then came the noise complaints. Every morning at 6:30 a.m., like clockwork, I'd slip into my lake for a peaceful swim. Suddenly, the sheriff's department started getting calls about disruptive water activities and excessive splashing, disturbing the peace. The deputies were apologetic but professional. They had to respond to complaints, even ridiculous ones. "Sir," Deputy Brooks explained after the third false alarm, "we're not finding any noise violations, but someone's really determined to make your morning swim our problem. You might consider documenting these calls as harassment." Brenda's creativity was impressive, I'll give her that. She filed a complaint with the county claiming my solar panels created dangerous glare that could blind drivers on Pine Ridge Road. Never mind that my panels were positioned to avoid glare, or that she'd have to be trespassing on my property to experience any reflection issues. But the attack that really got my attention came when she targeted my electrical business. Suddenly, fake Google reviews appeared overnight. "Unprofessional contractor with legal troubles," and "Avoid involved in HOA disputes and property violations." 2 long-term clients called asking if I was having professional problems they should know about. That's when I realized Brenda wasn't just power-hungry, she was dangerous. This woman would destroy someone's livelihood over a neighborhood squabble. The metallic taste of stress filled my mouth every morning when I checked my business reviews, wondering what fresh damage I'd find. I hired a private investigator, a former police detective named Sarah Cruz, who specialized in harassment cases. What Cruz found would have been amusing if it wasn't so disturbing. Brenda was spending 4 to 6 hours daily on HOA activities, photographing properties, documenting violations, researching residents. She'd created spreadsheets tracking every neighbor's daily routines, noting when they left for work, when they returned, who visited, how long visitors stayed. "Marcus," Cruz told me, reviewing her surveillance photos, "this woman has turned neighborhood management into a full-time stalking operation. Look at this." The photos showed Brenda's home office, wall maps of Pine Ridge with colored pins marking violations, binders organized by address containing property records, personal information, even divorce documents for recently single neighbors. She'd somehow obtained credit reports, employment records, and family details that had no relevance to HOA business. "She's building dossiers on everyone," Cruz explained. "Classic intimidation technique. Know your enemy's weak spots, then exploit them." That explained Mrs. Patterson's harassment after her husband's death, and Bob's pressure to sell after losing his wife. Brenda was targeting vulnerable neighbors, using their grief and confusion to manipulate property sales. But Cruz's most shocking discovery came from monitoring Brenda's communications. She'd been secretly meeting with developers interested in purchasing multiple Pine Ridge properties for commercial redevelopment. The woman wasn't just pressuring neighbors to sell, she was working with outside interests to break up the residential community entirely. "She gets commission on every sale, plus consulting fees from the developers," Cruz explained. "Your lake property is the crown jewel, prime commercial real estate if she can force you out." The mini twist hit me like a live electrical wire. This wasn't random HOA overreach. Brenda was running a systematic operation to destabilize the neighborhood for profit, using her official position to pressure sales while secretly working with developers who wanted to transform Pine Ridge into commercial property. That night, I sat on my dock listening to loons call across water my grandfather had protected for decades, feeling the weight of responsibility settle around my shoulders like morning mist. This wasn't just about my right to swim anymore. Brenda was trying to destroy an entire community for money. The next morning brought Brenda's nuclear option, a lawsuit seeking $25,000 in damages for creating a public nuisance that destroys property values. She demanded an injunction banning all lake access pending resolution, claiming my swimming activities constituted reckless endangerment of community welfare. I read the lawsuit papers while standing knee-deep in crystal-clear spring water that had been flowing here since before Colorado was a state, tasting the bitterness of legal threats mixed with the sweetness of absolute resolve. Brenda wanted to play hardball? Fine. Time to show her what happens when you threaten someone who controls the water supply for your entire operation. Game over, lady. You just made the worst mistake of your HOA career. My attorney, Beverly Thornton, called on a Thursday morning with news that would change everything. Beverly's one of those lawyers who specializes in water rights, the kind of specialist you need when dealing with Colorado's complex water law, where people fight over liquid assets like they're made of gold. "Marcus," she said, barely containing her excitement, "you need to sit down for this. I found your grandfather's original water rights documentation in the state archives." What she'd discovered was better than winning the lottery. My grandfather hadn't just bought 15 acres of land back in 1960. He'd purchased exclusive rights to the entire natural spring system that feeds my lake. Not just the water that flows across my property, but the underground aquifer that supplies the whole damn Pine Ridge development. Every ornamental pond, every irrigation system, every decorative water feature in your neighborhood, Beverly explained, depends on water that flows from springs you legally own. The HOA development was built assuming they'd have continued access to this water source, but nobody verified the rights during construction. The legal implications made my electrician's brain buzz with possibilities. HOA spent $2 million on landscaping that required constant irrigation. Half the houses had private wells connected to my aquifer system. The community's insurance policies and property values were built around maintaining those water features that made Pine Ridge an upscale address, and I controlled the source. "Could I legally cut off their water access?" I asked. "Absolutely," Beverly replied. "You could install shutoff valves tomorrow and force renegotiation of every development agreement. But Marcus, this is nuclear option territory. You'd have tremendous power, but using it irresponsibly could destroy property values for innocent neighbors." That night, I walked the perimeter of my springs by flashlight, breathing the cool underground air that carries the mineral scent of deep earth, feeling the responsibility of this discovery settle into my bones like winter cold. I could destroy Brenda's entire operation with one phone call to a valve company. But I could also devastate families who'd done nothing wrong except choose the wrong neighborhood association president. The water rights documentation was 40 pages of legal language, but it boiled down to something beautiful. Absolute control over water resources that made Pine Ridge possible. My grandfather had been smarter than anyone realized. He'd secured not just his own future, but leverage over any development that might surround him. I spent 3 days calculating the numbers. 30 years of free water service to HOA properties. Fair market rates for a private utility service. The math was staggering. I'd been providing over $400,000 worth of water services without compensation, while Brenda's HOA nickel-and-dimed residents for manufactured violations. "Beverly," I said during our strategy session, "what if I don't want to destroy the community? What if I want to use this leverage to fix it?" She smiled like a lawyer who'd found the perfect settlement terms. "Then we offer reasonable water contracts to everyone except your problem neighbor, and we use your leverage to clean house and HOA management." The plan crystallized like ice forming on still water. I would assert my water rights publicly, demonstrating the power to control HOA's entire operation. Then I'd offer fair contracts to reasonable neighbors while exposing Brenda's corruption and freezing her out of any water access. "One more thing," Beverly added. "These water rights make your property worth significantly more than you realized. We're not just talking about 15 acres of lake property, we're talking about owning the utility infrastructure for a multi-million-dollar development." I hung up the phone and walked to my lake's edge, watching moonlight ripple across water that suddenly represented power I'd never imagined possessing. Brenda thought she was fighting someone who just wanted to swim in his lake. She was about to discover she'd declared war on someone who controlled her community's lifeline. Building a legal army takes more than anger and good intentions. It takes strategy, expertise, and the kind of methodical planning that separates amateur hour from professional warfare. Lucky for me, 20 years as an electrical contractor taught me how to manage complex projects where one mistake could burn down the house. Beverly Thornton became my general contractor for legal strategy, but she recommended bringing in specialists. Water rights law in Colorado is complex enough to make tax code look simple, so we hired Dr. Patricia Vance, a hydrologist with 30 years of experience in utility water disputes. Environmental law angles required bringing in James Morrison, who'd spent his career wrestling with HOA overreach cases. "Think of this like wiring a house," Beverly explained during our war council meeting at her downtown office, where the smell of leather-bound law books mixed with coffee strong enough to wake the dead. "We need separate circuits for different aspects: water rights enforcement, HOA corruption exposure, community relations management, and legal protection for reasonable neighbors." The financial strategy required serious number crunching. Dr. Vance calculated 30 years of water service value using current utility rates. $427,000 worth of spring water provided free to Pine Ridge development. That figure would be our opening position for any negotiations. But here's where my contractor experience paid off. I understand the difference between what something's worth and what people can actually pay. Bankrupting the entire neighborhood wouldn't solve anything. We needed reasonable rates that covered my costs while acknowledging neighbors weren't responsible for Brenda's malfeasance. Fair market rates for ongoing water service would be about $150 monthly per household, Dr. Vance calculated. That's significantly below municipal rates for premium spring water. While the legal team handled paperwork, I started building community support. Bob Fitzgerald became my unofficial neighborhood ambassador, quietly reaching out to other victims of Brenda's harassment campaign. Mrs. Emerson organized coffee gatherings where people could share their HOA horror stories without fear of retaliation. The stories were worse than I'd imagined. Brenda had been systematically targeting anyone she perceived as vulnerable: recent widows, elderly residents, families dealing with medical crises. Her pattern was always the same: manufactured violations, escalating harassment, pressure to sell through her real estate company. She tried to fine me for excessive holiday decorations, Mrs. Patterson explained during one of our informal meetings. My Christmas lights were the same ones I'd used for 15 years. But suddenly they were a fire hazard requiring immediate removal. Technical preparation required precision work. I installed flow meters on every spring output to document exactly how much water flowed to HOA properties. The equipment looked like something from a science fiction movie. Digital sensors recording every gallon that left my property for community use. Dr. Vance's hydrological survey mapped the complete underground water system, revealing just how dependent Pine Ridge was on my springs. Every ornamental pond, every irrigation line, every decorative fountain traced back to aquifers I controlled. "It's actually elegant engineering," Dr. Vance explained, reviewing her survey results. "Your grandfather's property sits at the perfect elevation to control water distribution for the entire development. Shutting off access would drain their water features within 72 hours. Document preparation required military-level organization. We drafted formal water rights assertion letters for every property owner, created template contracts for ongoing service, and prepared comprehensive evidence packages documenting Brenda's corruption. The masterstroke required perfect timing. HOA annual meetings happen once yearly, our one chance to address the entire community simultaneously with maximum legal and media impact. We scheduled our water rights assertion for the day of Brenda's planned re-election, when she'd be most vulnerable to public exposure. Media strategy meant reaching out to local reporters who specialized in David versus Goliath stories. Colorado has a long history of water rights disputes, and journalists love stories about small property owners standing up to corrupt authorities. "We'll have Channel 7 News covering the meeting," Beverly reported, plus reporters from the Denver Post and Pine Ridge Gazette. This story has everything: corruption, water rights, community drama, and a clear victim versus villain narrative. My secret weapon was documentation. Every conversation with Brenda, every harassment incident, every suspicious HOA financial transaction, everything was recorded, photographed, or witnessed. When the time came to present evidence, we'd have enough documentation to prosecute a RICO case. The plan was simple in concept, complex in execution. Assert water rights at the public meeting, offer reasonable contracts to cooperative neighbors, expose Brenda's corruption with documented evidence, and let community pressure force her resignation while maintaining water service for innocent residents. Financial takeaway for your audience, Beverly noted: water rights can be more valuable than the land itself. Always verify who controls utilities before buying property, especially in developments near natural water sources. As we finalized preparations, I felt the satisfaction of a complex electrical project coming together perfectly. Every wire in its proper place, every connection tested and verified, every backup system ready for activation. Brenda thought she was dealing with an amateur who'd fold under pressure. She was about to face a professional who'd had plenty of time to wire the perfect trap. The first sign Brenda sensed danger came when she spotted Dr. Vance's hydrological survey team working around my springs. Nothing says serious legal preparation like professional scientists with measurement equipment. And Brenda's Range Rover started appearing more frequently, positioned for surveillance like she was running counterintelligence operations. Her panic became obvious when she started making calls. Bob Fitzgerald overheard her on the phone outside the community center, voice rising with each conversation. "What do you mean water rights? I thought that was just decorative. No, nobody mentioned controlling the water supply. How was I supposed to know?" The woman who'd spent 18 months terrorizing neighbors with manufactured violations suddenly realized she might be fighting someone who could turn off her water. Her first damage control attempt was laughably transparent. Brenda showed up at my door with coffee and pastries, wearing the kind of fake smile that makes used car salesmen look sincere. "Marcus," she said, balancing a plate of store-bought cookies like a peace offering, "I think we may have gotten off on the wrong foot. Perhaps we could discuss our differences privately, neighbor to neighbor." The woman who'd threatened lawsuits and demanded $25,000 in damages was suddenly interested in neighborly conversation. I accepted her coffee, it was decent, and listened to her offer to drop all pending legal action in exchange for my promise not to pursue any unnecessary complications regarding property boundaries. "What kind of complications?" I asked innocently. Brenda's eye twitched like a malfunctioning circuit breaker. "Well, some residents have expressed concern about water-related issues. I wouldn't want any misunderstandings to affect community relations." Translation: she'd discovered my water rights and was terrified of their implications. When diplomacy failed, Brenda escalated to sabotage. The next week brought a series of mysterious utility maintenance activities that somehow always blocked access to my property. County Water Department trucks appeared for emergency repairs that required closing Pine Ridge Road during my morning swimming hours. The coincidence was about as subtle as a short circuit. I called the water department and learned they had no scheduled maintenance in our area. Someone was ordering fake utility work to interfere with my property access. Bob Fitzgerald's detective work revealed Brenda's husband owned a small excavation company that occasionally did county subcontract work. Amazing how creative people get when they're desperate to control a situation spinning beyond their reach. But Brenda's true desperation showed when she started attacking other neighbors who'd shown me support. Mrs. Emerson received a violation notice for excessive garden plantings creating sightline obstructions. Bob got cited for vehicle maintenance activities because he'd changed his oil in his own driveway. The message was clear: support Marcus, face retaliation. That's when the community started pushing back. Mrs. Patterson stood up at a board meeting and asked why violation notices had increased 400% since Brenda became president. The Johnsons demanded an audit of HOA finances, questioning why administrative costs had tripled while common area maintenance declined. "Where exactly is our money going?" Johnson asked, reviewing financial statements that showed $30,000 in consulting fees to Brenda's company. "And why does every violation seem to involve contractors who pay referral fees to board members?" Brenda's response was to call an emergency board meeting, claiming I was threatening community stability and intimidating residents through implied utility manipulation. She tried rushing through a resolution declaring authority over all water sources within HOA boundaries. The legal language was impressive for someone who'd been studying water law for exactly 3 weeks. Unfortunately, her research had missed a few key details about established property rights and Colorado water law precedent. My countermove was beautifully simple. I recorded everything. Colorado is a one-party consent state, meaning I could legally document every conversation, threat, and corrupt offer. When Brenda suggested I might face serious consequences for not cooperating with community interests, her words were preserved in high-definition digital audio. The mini twist that sealed her fate came when she made a critical mistake. Desperate to find allies, Brenda reached out to the developers who'd been pressuring neighbors to sell. She arranged a secret meeting to discuss resolving the water situation through strategic property acquisition. What she didn't realize was that Mrs. Emerson had followed her to that meeting, photographed the participants, and documented license plates. When we ran those plates, we discovered representatives from 3 different development companies, plus the attorney who'd been pressuring Bob Fitzgerald to sell his deceased wife's garden property. Brenda wasn't just running a corrupt HOA. She was coordinating with outside developers to systematically break up our residential community for commercial redevelopment. Every harassment campaign, every manufactured violation, every pressure tactic was part of a larger scheme to force property sales. The smell of corruption was stronger than the diesel fumes from emergency utility vehicles cluttering our road and twice as toxic. With less than 2 weeks until the annual meeting, Brenda had revealed herself as someone willing to destroy an entire community for profit. Time to show her what happens when you threaten someone who controls the water supply. With the annual meeting approaching like a Colorado thunderstorm, Brenda's desperation reached levels that would make a gambling addict at Vegas look rational. Her expensive attorney, clearly costing more than her HOA president position could justify, filed a temporary restraining order demanding I cease all activities that threaten community water stability. The irony was delicious. The woman who'd spent months harassing me was now legally claiming I was the threat to community stability. Judge Martinez, a practical man who'd dealt with Colorado water disputes for 20 years, reviewed the filings with the expression of someone discovering his breakfast cereal had turned to sawdust. After 15 minutes of reading, he looked over his glasses and asked Brenda's lawyer a simple question. "Counselor, are you asking me to prevent a property owner from exercising legally documented water rights on his own land?" "Your Honor," the attorney replied, clearly earning every dollar of his retainer fee. "The defendant's threats to disrupt water service constitute economic terrorism against 47 families." Judge Martinez turned to Beverly Thornton. "Ms. Thornton, is your client threatening to shut off water to innocent neighbors?" "No, Your Honor," Beverly replied smoothly. "Mr. Wellington is simply asserting his legal right to receive fair compensation for utility services he's provided free for 30 years. He's prepared to offer reasonable contracts to all cooperative neighbors." The restraining order was denied faster than a bad electrical inspection. But the court hearing gave local media exactly the story they'd been hoping for. Local man discovers he owns entire development's water supply. Channel 7 News ran a teaser that evening. Pine Ridge Water Wars. HOA president discovers she can't control what she doesn't own. Tonight at 11. Brenda's panic reached nuclear levels. She offered me $50,000 personal payment to drop all water rights claims, money that clearly wasn't coming from her HOA salary. When that failed, she threatened to expose details about my divorce, apparently believing that failed marriage was somehow relevant to property ownership. "Marcus," she said during a phone call I was legally recording, "you don't understand the consequences of what you're doing. These people trusted me to protect their investments. If property values collapse because of your water threats, you'll face liability claims that could destroy you financially." The metallic taste of rage filled my mouth. This woman had spent months trying to destroy my livelihood, and now she was threatening financial warfare if I didn't surrender my legal rights. But her most desperate move came when she tried organizing an economic boycott of my electrical business. She contacted every homeowner in Pine Ridge, claiming I was holding the community hostage and suggesting they avoid hiring someone willing to threaten neighbors' water supply. That backfired spectacularly. Instead of organizing against me, her calls triggered a flood of support. Neighbors who'd been quietly enduring Brenda's harassment for months finally had someone willing to stand up to her tactics. Mrs. Emerson organized a Neighbors for Fair Management group that collected documented evidence of Brenda's corruption, inappropriate contractor kickbacks, manufactured violations, harassment of vulnerable residents, and her secret coordination with developers trying to break up the residential community. "We've been afraid to speak up individually," Mrs. Emerson explained during one of our strategy meetings, "but together, we have enough evidence to remove her from office and possibly press criminal charges." Bob Fitzgerald's research uncovered the financial scope of Brenda's operation. In 18 months, her company had received $47,000 in HOA consulting fees, plus an estimated $85,000 in real estate commissions from pressured property sales, plus kickback payments from contractors she'd recommended for violation corrections. "She's been running a systematic extortion operation," Bob concluded, reviewing bank records he'd obtained through perfectly legal public information requests. Every violation, every harassment campaign, every pressure tactic was designed to generate revenue for her personal business. The media attention intensified as reporters discovered the broader implications of my water rights. Environmental lawyers started calling, interested in precedent cases. Property rights advocates saw an opportunity to challenge HOA overreach. Water policy experts wanted to discuss utility privatization issues. But the most satisfying development came from the county attorney's office. After reviewing evidence of Brenda's developer coordination and financial irregularities, they opened a formal investigation into potential corruption and conspiracy charges. Real estate agents who use official positions for personal profit face serious professional consequences, the county attorney explained to Channel 7 News. We take these allegations very seriously. With 48 hours until the annual meeting, I completed installation of master shutoff valves for all HOA water access, not to threaten anyone, but to demonstrate the reality of my legal control. Every ornamental pond, every irrigation system, every decorative fountain could be controlled from equipment I'd installed on my own property. The mini twist that completed Brenda's downfall came when her own board members started questioning her authority. Diane Mitchell, the treasurer who'd been Brenda's ally, suddenly demanded an emergency audit of all financial transactions after discovering she could face personal liability for approving improper payments. Insurance companies started sending notices about coverage questions related to utility access disputes. Property appraisers called wanting clarity about water rights before completing home valuations. Brenda had picked a fight with someone who controlled the foundation of her entire operation, and now the weight of reality was crushing her authority like a house of cards in a windstorm. The Pine Ridge Community Center had never hosted a crowd like this. 87 residents packed into a space designed for 40, with overflow seating and folding chairs borrowed from 3 neighboring churches. The local news crew took up one entire corner, their camera lights making the whole room feel like a movie set where the final showdown was about to unfold. You could smell the tension mixed with burnt coffee from the ancient machine that had been gurgling nervously all evening. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead like angry wasps, casting harsh shadows across faces filled with anticipation, anxiety, and in Brenda's case, barely controlled panic. She'd dressed for battle in her best power suit, sitting behind the board table like a general preparing to defend her last stronghold. But even her armor couldn't hide the stress lines around her eyes, or the way her manicured fingers trembled slightly as she shuffled through prepared statements. Tonight's agenda, Brenda began, her voice artificially bright, includes routine business and discussion of certain property issues that have been brought to our attention. And that's when County Water Authority Representative James Patterson stood up from the back row. His presence wasn't on any agenda, but water rights disputes automatically involve municipal oversight. The collective intake of breath sounded like air leaking from a punctured tire. Brenda's opening gambit was desperate but predictable. She presented me as a threat to community stability and property values, claiming my water rights assertion was frivolous intimidation designed to circumvent legitimate HOA authority. Marcus Wellington has spent months refusing to comply with reasonable community standards, she declared, her voice rising with each word. Now he's threatening to hold our entire neighborhood hostage using technicalities about water access. This is exactly the kind of selfish behavior that destroys property values and community harmony. The performance was impressive, if you ignored the documented evidence stacked 3 feet high on my table. When Brenda finished her presentation, I stood up slowly, feeling the weight of 30 years of family history and 6 months of systematic harassment settling into my bones like winter cold. Thank you, Brenda, I said quietly. Now let me show everyone what community standards actually look like. I started with the simple math. 30 years of free water service worth $427,000, provided without compensation or even acknowledgement from HOA leadership. Then I presented documentation of every spring, every aquifer, every water source that made Pine Ridge's $800,000 homes possible. Every ornamental pond in this development, every irrigation system keeping your lawns green, every decorative fountain that makes your property worth what you paid, all of it depends on water from springs my family has owned since 1960. The room got quiet enough to hear the coffee machine's dying gurgle. Patterson from the Water Authority stepped forward. Ladies and gentlemen, I can confirm that Mr. Wellington owns exclusive rights to the spring system that supplies this entire development. Without his continued cooperation, your water features would cease functioning within 72 hours. That's when the evidence avalanche began. Bob Fitzgerald presented recordings of Brenda's threats against vulnerable neighbors. Mrs. Emerson documented the harassment campaign targeting recent widows and elderly residents. The Johnsons revealed financial records showing Brenda's company had received $47,000 in questionable HOA consulting fees. But the bombshell moment came when Mrs. Patterson stood up with photographs from Brenda's secret developer meetings. She's been coordinating with outside companies trying to buy our properties for commercial redevelopment, Mrs. Patterson announced, her teacher's voice cutting through the shocked murmurs. Every violation, every harassment campaign, every pressure tactic was designed to force residents to sell so she could profit from destroying our neighborhood. Brenda's meltdown was spectacular. She screamed about ungrateful residents who don't appreciate dedicated volunteer service, threatened to sue every neighbor who didn't support her, and claimed I was destroying the American dream of homeownership through legal technicalities. "You people don't understand what I've sacrificed for this community," she shrieked, her composure finally cracking like overstressed electrical insulation. "I've worked 18 hours a day protecting your property values, and this is how you repay me?" That's when I delivered the mic drop moment I'd been preparing for months. I stood up holding the master shutoff valve key, a simple brass device that controlled water access for the entire development, and let the silence stretch until you could taste the metallic tension in the recycled air. "Brenda," I said quietly, my voice carrying clearly through the packed room, "I could legally shut off water to every HOA property right now. Instead, I'm offering fair contracts to all my neighbors, except you." The stunned silence lasted exactly 3 seconds before erupting into applause that shook dust from the acoustic tiles. The vote removing Brenda from office was 84-3. Bob Fitzgerald was elected emergency HOA president by acclamation. The county attorney announced a formal investigation into financial irregularities and conspiracy charges, and Brenda's harassment lawsuit was dismissed with prejudice, plus $25,000 in damages for reputation harm to my electrical business. Justice tastes sweeter than spring water on a hot summer day. The morning after the meeting, Pine Ridge felt different. You could sense it in the way neighbors waved instead of hurrying past each other, smell it in the coffee shared on front porches instead of consumed behind locked doors. The toxic cloud of fear that had hung over our community for 18 months had finally lifted. Within a week, every neighbor except Brenda had signed fair water usage agreements. I gave everyone a 6-month grace period to adjust budgets because decent people shouldn't suffer for their HOA president's corruption. The contracts were simple: $150 monthly for premium spring water service, with guaranteed access and transparent pricing. That money allowed me to properly maintain the spring system, install modern filtration equipment, and even expand capacity for future needs. For the first time in decades, my grandfather's water rights were generating legitimate income while serving the community he'd helped create. Bob Fitzgerald transformed HOA operations with engineering precision. He implemented term limits for board positions, mandatory financial audits, and a cooling-off period for any property violations. Most importantly, he created a resident advocate position to prevent future harassment campaigns. "Nobody should face what you went through," Bob explained during our first peaceful board meeting. "We're here to maintain property values, not terrorize residents into compliance with manufactured standards." Brenda's fate was swift and decisive. Her real estate license was suspended pending ethics investigation, her husband's excavation company lost all county contracts, and legal fees forced them to sell their house within 3 months. They moved to a distant suburb where nobody knew their history of community destruction. The developers who'd been coordinating with Brenda disappeared faster than morning mist when county investigators started asking questions about conspiracy to manipulate property sales. Pine Ridge would remain residential, protected by neighbors who'd learned the value of standing together against predatory schemes. But the real transformation was personal. My electrical business boomed with referrals from grateful neighbors who'd witnessed someone stand up to systematic intimidation. Word spread through professional networks about the contractor who'd used water rights to defeat HOA corruption, generating new clients across 3 counties. Even better, my relationship with Beverly Thornton evolved beyond attorney-client professional courtesy. A woman who could navigate Colorado water law with surgical precision while maintaining her sense of humor turned out to be exactly the kind of partner I'd been hoping to find. We took our first official date swimming in my lake, surrounded by water that had become a symbol of community victory rather than personal conflict. The annual Lake Day Festival started the following summer, a community celebration of water conservation, property rights, and neighbor solidarity. Families brought picnics to the shoreline, children learned about spring ecology, and adults shared stories about standing up to petty tyrants. We established a scholarship fund for local students studying environmental law, funded by a portion of water service revenue. 3 high school seniors received grants to pursue careers protecting natural resources and property rights. Mrs. Emerson organized a neighborhood watch program focused on supporting vulnerable residents, recent widows, elderly neighbors, families facing medical crises. Never again would someone face harassment during their most difficult moments without community backup. Property values actually increased after resolving the water rights uncertainty. Stable utility access, transparent HOA management, and proven community solidarity made Pine Ridge more attractive than ever. Real estate agents started promoting our neighborhood as a model for resident-controlled governance. The broader impact reached far beyond our 15 acres. My story inspired water rights research in neighboring developments, prompted new county oversight regulations for HOA operations, and I started consulting with residents fighting similar battles across Colorado. Sometimes the best revenge is building something better than what they tried to tear down, became my standard advice for property owners facing intimidation tactics. This morning I took my usual swim in water that sparkles with sunrise light, listening to loons call across liquid peace that belongs to my family and serves my community. The lake reflects not just sky and mountains, but the satisfaction of using power responsibly to protect rather than exploit. Share your worst HOA nightmare story in the comments below. We've all got them, and sunlight is the best disinfectant for petty corruption. Subscribe for more David versus Goliath property rights victories, because somewhere right now another small-time tyrant is about to learn what happens when regular people discover the law is actually on their side.